It's 11:40 p.m. on April 14th, 1912. You're asleep in your cabin. The North Atlantic is calm, unusually calm for this time of year. No waves, no wind. Just the low hum of engines that have been running for 4 days straight. Then something happens. Not an explosion, not a crash. Something quieter than that. A sound survivors described as a long, low tear, like someone slowly ripping a piece of fabric. A shudder that runs through the floor under your feet. And then, silence. The engines stop. You don't know it yet, but you have 2 hours and 40 minutes left. Here's what you didn't feel and why. Most people imagine the Titanic slamming head-on into an iceberg, a Hollywood collision, metal crumpling, chaos erupting instantly. That's not what happened. The lookout spotted the iceberg with just 37 seconds to react. First Officer Murdoch ordered a hard turn to port and reversed the engines. The turn started, but the ship was 882 feet long. It couldn't turn fast enough. What hit wasn't the bow, it was the starboard side, the right side of the ship, below the waterline. The iceberg scraped along nearly 300 feet of hull, punching open 6 of the ship's 16 watertight compartments. Not a dramatic rupture, a series of small punctures and buckled seams, some no wider than your hand. The Titanic was designed to float with 4 compartments flooded. 6 was a death sentence. But the water would take time. That's why you barely felt it. That's why most passengers simply rolled over and went back to sleep. You're awake now, not because of the impact, because the engines have stopped and the silence woke you. In first class, on the upper decks, stewards are moving quietly through the corridors, politely knocking on doors. Precautionary measure, sir. Could you put on your life belt and proceed to the boat deck? Calm voices, no alarm. Most passengers assume it's a drill. In third class, below the waterline, it's different. Water is already appearing in corridors. Passengers are grabbing children, bags, anything they can carry, pushing towards stairwells that most of them have never used. The gates between decks were locked under normal operation. Some of them are still locked now. On the bridge, Captain Smith has already received the report from the ship's designer, Thomas Andrews. Andrews tells him the ship will sink. He estimates 1 hour, maybe 2. Smith sends the distress signal at 12:15 a.m. The nearest ship, the Carpathia, is 58 miles away. At full speed, she'll take 4 hours to arrive. The Titanic has less than 2. Here's a number that will sit with you. The Titanic carried 2,224 people. Its lifeboats had capacity for 1,178. That's already not enough, but it gets worse. The first lifeboat lowered had capacity for 65 people. It launched with 27. Passengers didn't want to get in. Standing on a massive, brightly lit ship, music still playing in the first-class lounge, the lifeboats looked small and frightening in comparison. The ocean below was black and freezing. The ship felt solid underfoot. Why would you step off something this size into a wooden boat in the middle of the North Atlantic at midnight? Officers were ordered to prioritize women and children, but the loading was chaotic, uneven. Different officers interpreted the order differently. Some boats left nearly empty. Some launched without being fully lowered, dropping the last few feet and shocking the people inside. And still, most passengers didn't truly believe the ship was going to sink. The band played on. Ragtime, then hymns. This is the moment the mood changed. By 12:30 a.m., the bow of the ship was visibly lower in the water. Not dramatically, maybe a few degrees, but enough that if you placed a ball on the deck of the first-class lounge, it would roll slowly forward toward the nose of the ship. People started to understand. The calm evaporated. Passengers who had been watching the lifeboats with mild curiosity were now pushing toward them. Men who had stepped back to let women and children through were reconsidering. Families were being separated, a wife lowered into a boat, a husband told to step back. In third class, the situation was deteriorating faster. Passengers who had been trying to navigate upward through the ship's corridors were finding passageways blocked by rising water. Some made it to the boat deck. Many didn't know the routes. In the Marconi room, the radio operators were still sending distress signals. One of them, Harold Bride, would later recall that they were joking between transmissions, because what else do you do? Something that gets lost in most Titanic retellings: the cold. The North Atlantic that night was 28 degrees Fahrenheit, below freezing. Salt water freezes at a lower temperature than fresh. If you entered that water, you had somewhere between 15 and 45 minutes before hypothermia rendered you unconscious. Less if you were in shock, less if you were elderly or a child. This is why the lifeboats mattered so absolutely, not as a preference, as the only possible survival mechanism. Anyone who entered the water without reaching a lifeboat was almost certainly going to die. Not from drowning, but from cold. The people in the lifeboats were watching this. Floating 50, 100, 200 feet away from the ship, they could hear the people still on board. They could hear the music stop. They could see the lights. And they could see the tilt getting worse. Most lifeboat passengers did not row back toward the ship. They were afraid of being swamped by desperate swimmers. Lifeboat 14 was one of the only ones that returned after the sinking. It rescued a handful of people from the water. By 2 a.m., the bow was underwater. The forward sections, the lower decks, the cargo holds, the third-class quarters, the engine rooms, were completely flooded. The crew in the boiler rooms had been working until the last possible moment, keeping the lights on, keeping the pumps running, buying minutes for the people above them. Most of them didn't make it out. The stern was rising out of the water as the bow pulled downward. Passengers and crew who were still on board were clustering toward the back, climbing the increasingly steep deck, holding onto railings, each other, anything fixed. The lights flickered, then went out, then came back, then went out for the last time at approximately 2:17 a.m. In the darkness, the stern continued to rise. At that angle, the ship broke. Not slowly, suddenly. A sound survivors in the lifeboats described as a roar, like a building collapsing, followed by a series of crashes as everything inside the ship fell forward. At 2:20 a.m., the stern slipped under. And then there was a sound that every survivor described, and that no one who heard it ever forgot. 1,500 people were in the water, in lifebelts mostly, so they weren't sinking. They were floating, in 28-degree water, in the dark. And they were calling out. Survivor testimony describes it as a roar at first, a collective sound, voices and screaming merging into something that didn't sound human. Then, over the next 20 minutes, as hypothermia took hold, the sound diminished. Not all at once, gradually, voice by voice going quiet, until the ocean was nearly silent again. The people in the lifeboats listened to this happen. Many of them never spoke about it afterward, not because they didn't want to, because there were no words that fit what they heard. The Carpathia arrived at 4:10 a.m., 1 hour and 50 minutes after the Titanic went under. She pulled 710 survivors from the lifeboats. Of the 2,224 people who had been on board, 1,514 died, most of them in the water, in the first 20 minutes after the ship sank. The survivors who were pulled aboard were, almost universally, silent, not crying, not speaking, wrapped in blankets, staring at nothing. The Carpathia's passengers came up on deck expecting to be helpful, expecting to comfort people, expecting a rescue scene. What they found was something they didn't have a framework for. 2 hours and 40 minutes. That's how long it took for the largest ship ever built to go from a long, low tear in the night to silence. What makes the Titanic different from other disasters isn't the scale exactly. It's the time. 2 hours and 40 minutes is long enough to understand what's happening, long enough to make choices, long enough to watch the gap between who gets saved and who doesn't become completely clear, long enough to hear the music stop. You would have been one of 2,224 people who boarded that ship. Whether you made it into a lifeboat or didn't depended less on luck than on where you were sleeping when the engines stopped. The iceberg didn't choose. The ship's layout did.